So, Hoop, as I see your career, you change multiple roles. From dev, you become lead, and architect, and dev manager. So, what I'm interested to know is at every step, what you change about yourself from when you become dev to dev lead, and
Mhm.
then when you become dev manager, now you become M2. So there's a two-pronged question. So what did you change about yourself to become successful in this new role?
Well, I think as I've grown in more management leadership, two things. One thing that I got a lot of encouragement and advice on doing as I grew in management was to start seeing the success of myself through my engineering team. In particular, as someone who I love to code. I'm like, I want to understand what's going on like from the silicon all the way to the photons. I want to know
Mhm.
exactly how the system works, and I would love to write code in any layer in the stack. And when you're a manager, you're not actually going to get to do that. You don't get to participate in every single bit, and instead you hire smart people or people who are smarter than you to do the same things that you want to be doing, and you see success through them, and your success is their success is your success.
Mhm.
um, that was something that I had to like transform in myself, as I thought about the work that I did, and what it meant to be an impactful leader and to expand impact in general. And so surrounding myself with other leads who I believe I'm like, I can hand this off to you and you're going to go and do a great job. That was probably one of the biggest shifts that I had to make, within myself, is being able to let go and actually not feel like I need to know what's going on. I need to be in all of the meetings that I
Mhm.
want to be in. You can't even be in all the meetings you should be in, much less the ones you want to be in.
True,
And so
true.
that's probably the biggest change I made.
Biggest change because you were one of the superstar devs. So taking keyboard away from your hand must be difficult.
Yes, yes, it is. And so one of the things I still try and stay technically involved and like to look at code, but then it's
Mm,
important to not put myself in the critical path for anything the team is working on, because again, that's not the most important job for me. And at any point in time, something that's more important about growing my team or my people, or focusing on the site, could come up. And if I'm like blocking a P1 bug that's blocking a customer, well, that's not the great thing. But there's a lot of opportunity to get involved still in what I call Horizon 2 things that the team is doing. If we're sitting down thinking about switching like a network protocol, or switching a component that's going to have a critical impact but is a really, really far away thing, yeah, I can get go and like play around with that. And that's sort of my like little treat after I've uh, focused on being a manager. I can still go and play with tech. It's just being disciplined enough to know that I'm not the core coding person anymore
true.
is, I think, key.
Right,
And
right.
then I think another thing, that one of our engineering leaders here in Mixed Reality has talked about, is to think a lot about your people as much as you think about the product that they're building. Like, you
Mm,
put as much thought into the team that you're building as you do into the product you're building, and treat it as such. You collect data about the product, you collect data about your team, and we do that at Microsoft through MS Poll and other things. But just like you're customer obsessed when you're building a product, you should be obsessed with the customer when you're leading a team, and the customer there is your team. They're the ones you're leading.
true.
And I think that's something that I had to like really continuously tell myself, is like, no, you're not spending too much. There's no such thing as too much time on the people side of your job. It's as important as the product side.
True, true. Yeah, because the product is the output of people, and if they are
Yeah.
happy, I'm sure the quality of the product is very, very different with a happy team. As you are running a pretty big team in Microsoft Mesh, I'm sure this is going across multiple countries. Groups will be there developing pieces of it, and you are coordinating with everybody. So
Yeah.
I'm just wondering about what are the engineering best practices you follow? How do you plan?
Sure. One of the things I'll say to start out is that we are always learning and always saying, yeah, that thing we tried, that didn't work out so well. Like
Hmm.
it's a continuous learning process for us. We've tried a number of different models of operating the team here in Lagos. And as we moved into Mesh in particular, one of the things that was challenging was how do you work on such a big product as you just described across multiple geographies and not have it require sort of lockstep synchronization.
Hmm.
In some sense, I mean, I don't want to like treat people like machines, but there's a similar problem in computer science where you have a lot of threads executing, they want to stay in sync. And the common solution with a small number of threads is to use a lock. When you have a very large number of threads and you start taking locks all the time, your code doesn't work well. And you need to find this lock-free way of building concurrency in order for things to run smoothly. I
Mm,
think when you're running a globally distributed organization, similarly, you need to figure out how to be as lock free as you can. And in
mm,
the case of global organizations, the lock is the meeting. Any
mm,
meeting that requires people in multiple time zones to sit down and be in sync is a synchronization point across what should be completely independent threads of work. And that is inevitable, but the more you can minimize it, the better. The fewer folks in the team that need to have meetings with folks on various parts of the world, the better. And so one thing that we've learned over time is having some amount of ownership in a region and having a region sort of develop into it. This is a center of excellence in this thing. When we have work in that area, we send it that region. It's costed and scheduled, but it's not like the PM is here for the project and the dev is here and then the designer is over here. That sort of model is much harder to do. It still works in certain cases, but we found that that is something that we need to be very conscious of, is avoiding that particular locking time.
mm,
Another
mm,
thing that was well, let me give you a sort of funny one that we discovered was our DevOps system has these. You have these servers that when you're doing continuous integration, you check some code in, it builds the code, runs some tests, standard DevOps pipeline. But
mhm,
you have a finite number of machines. And so
mhm,
what we would find was, especially when everybody was under pressure, all the devs are coding, and like you have a deadline coming up, we would suddenly notice that the time to get code in actually gets greater and greater as you get later in the day. And
mm,
we started calling this getting Redmonded because there's like half of the team working in Redmond. And as soon as that half of the team wakes up and they start checking in, well, now the load on the machines doubled
mm,
instantaneously. Like as soon as Redmond wakes up, the load
mm.
on the pipeline machines doubled. And there's lots of solutions to it, but it was sort of
Sure.
this strange effect that we didn't notice offhand until there's like everybody was hammering the system that we shared, and suddenly we're like, hey, our check-ins went from 20 minutes to like over an hour. What's going on? And dev
Mm,
productivity is getting impacted by that. And that's one of those, okay, we've learned from that experience. We need to make sure that we can figure out, like, well, for one, as a dev, you know that that's going to happen, but for two, you can add more machines to the pool and
mhm,
and and
mhm,
address some of those issues. Um, and then I think another thing that has probably taken up more time than I thought it would take was understanding how to think culturally across different time zones. So
mm,
the basic simple one is holidays and understanding the importance of a holiday, like understanding like in some regions of the world, wants to work Christmas time. Other regions, people are like, eh. In Nigeria, Christmas is a pretty big deal, and you should expect that you're not going to have a huge amount of. Don't be planning on getting a huge amount of work done at that time unless you really need to. So planning for various happenings is interesting because you move from a world where you schedule a meeting and it happens regularly to if you have people in three different time zones, if any of those locations has national holiday, then your meeting has fewer people and the effectiveness of your meeting goes down. And I was actually pleasant. I don't know if pleasantly surprised, but I was surprised by the number of times that happens where there's a holiday not celebrated by everybody, but at
sure.
least a certain portion of the team is now affected. And that sort of, for me, goes back to my decoupling the teams is important
Mm,
philosophy, which is like you can't like again, don't assume that everyone's working at the same time. They're not working the same hours, or ideally they're not.
mm,
But you also should assume they're not working the same days. Um,
right.
I think we have a lot to learn on how about how to do it. Microsoft globally has grown quite incredibly in its like global presence, and in engineers outside of Redmond has grown substantially, and probably even more so over COVID. I don't remember when I saw the last
Hmm.
data, but I feel like we have a lot to learn to like really improve the efficiency. I've seen different models. There's some teams who have sites, like we've got the ADC site, and you have some teams that have individual folks working in different places. They're not going into the office. I don't
Hmm.
think we figured out the perfect middle ground balance, but I think there's a hybrid work model that we're going to figure out both in terms of how we work across regions and then within each individual region. That I'm
Hmm.
like ask me again in 3 years. I'll tell you what I've learned again.
Right, right.